I had with Jay the day that I announced about thinking about how you do this. First of all, I am a federalist. I believe there's a role of the federal government. I believe it unites us together. I see the strength in the 50 states. I, like you, share the frustrations when I see a map and I watch my colleagues from certain states tell us how things are going to be done, and I have to quote back to them that they are the very lowest in terms of achievement. They're very lowest in some of the economic numbers. They are the highest in some of the poverty rates and things. And this is not me. I oftentimes tell them this. I don't disagree with them because they're Republicans. I disagree because they're wrong and that their policies don't work. And so I think we need to think about this of modeling states. If the states are the laboratories of democracy, Kansas burned down. Some of these states have burned down. Other states are still prospering. They can spread all they want about, well, California's radical in this. California's economy is one of the 8th largest in the entire world on its own, and they're moving forward. So there are things that we can do co-op wise, and I think what's going to happen is the hope is that other states start to see this, because they were told, and I'd be very clear about this if you're a progressive in this, a lot of our neighbors didn't believe we were on their side. A lot of folks didn't believe we had their best economic interests at heart, and in many cases, they viewed us as detrimental to the things that they wanted to do. I think that's an idea that we've always done from interstate transfer, but make the case of states that are going to move in a direction that we know is going to improve people's lives, provide more equity, create a sustainable future, and those are things that I'm convinced of this. The vast majority of people don't wake up and lock themselves into a tribal ideology. There are some who say, I have to vote this way because they told me to. I have to vote this way because I feel like I'm tied to that. Most are pretty rational, and if they think it's going to move in a direction that makes sense in their lives or their children's lives, I just think that we have not been the best messengers in it. And I think there is strength in that proposal. Isn't it?
It seems like, I'm still formulating this thought as I'm asking the question, but it seems like there's some pretty powerful or significant force with budget that the Koch brothers or some of our churches or Fox News or whatever, but powerful, organized, and well-funded sources supporting things I personally don't much agree with. And I'm just kind of wondering what your thoughts are about running for governor in that.
Yeah. There's also powerful forces working against them. They're on a Wednesday night that's really nice in Minnesota, and they're at a library. It's true. And I don't say that quaintly because I say, think about this. I'm a high school, everybody has a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington story, but when I ask them, it turns out like their grandpa was a senator or and I'm like, the New Jersey guys always grab me and they say, tell your story. This guy was a school teacher, got all irritated, and he ran and won, and he doesn't know squat about politics. That's everything to say. So, yes, they are, and they're hitting on me. They always do. They've become very good at this. They are very good on their messaging. They're very good at dividing us apart, but there's a hunger out there that I'm telling you what they're missing on this is, I think they can win elections really well. They've done that. I think they can destroy candidates pretty well. They've done that. I think they've depressed voters and done that pretty well. But the thing that they are horrible at, they cannot govern. And at the end of the day, the lack of effectiveness opens up space again for folks to tell them, and we should be the party that is there to make sure that if somebody needs a hand up, we're there to give them a hand up. We should be the party that's there to make sure that there's equity and opportunity, but we should be the party that's there to celebrate when somebody becomes successful and understands that they're giving back. These large Fortune 500 companies here have a long history in Minneapolis of philanthropy that we can celebrate too. So I do believe we have to be armed and ready for it. Just think about this. They're already hitting ads at me and throwing things. By the time this is done, this governor's race will probably be a $50 million race. $50 million. I've been through this before. My kids barely like me at the end of it. It's like, Dad, are you really that ordinary? They try and get the pictures of me when I said I always look bad in pictures. But here's the thing. If not us, who? And I think many of us grew up at a time when we were happy and good because it felt like labor rights had been won, it felt like women's rights had been won, it felt like we were getting to a point. Remember the quaint days that people would say were almost post-racial? Yeah, that was not. So, all of those things. And I was standing next to a woman at the Women's March the day after the inauguration. By the way, I stood on the platform on both days. The Women's March was bigger. Yeah. This woman says to me, she says, God, I cannot believe I'm fighting this crap again. And then she turned to me and she said, and it's as much a privilege now as it was then. And I'm like, that's the way we need to view it. It's frustrating, they're grinding us down, they're making us fatigued on this, and they're like, why am I fighting on labor rights? Why am I fighting for a 40-hour work week? Why am I fighting that a woman wants to go to a doctor and make the decision with her doctor on her own, and all of a sudden, small government people want to be right there on every step of that way? Why are we fighting those things again? It's because that's the way it works, and that's the way you renew the democracy. It's the way you engage new people. It's why things like Indivisible or whatever it is spring up, because that's the genius of the system. It's becoming harder with the big money, but I'm telling you what works, and my wife is a firm believer on this. She said, you don't choose to go to a movie because it's just the write-up or going to Rotten Tomatoes. If you choose a movie, you choose because someone you trust or a neighbor told you that. And it's having those conversations. It's talking to folks. I want to see the day again where I can go back home at Thanksgiving and have that conversation without feeling like I'm going to get in a fist fight with my uncle or whatever. Just so you know, that little community I told you about where I grew up in, 93% of them voted for President Trump. 93%. My mom says what's good about that is she knows the 7% I can go have coffee with. But no, I think it's there. I refuse to put it on this, mainly because I believe in that. I said I'm glad I'm a black guy, not a Hobbs guy. I believe in that basic decency of people. I believe in the decency of my Republican neighbors who simply do want many of the same thing, but have been told for political reasons. And again, it's up to us to make the case. We're not losing them just because they're telling them these things. We're losing them because we're not making the case to them of why this makes great sense, why we're promoting freedom and equality. And we have to do a better job of it. And I am hopeful. Sorry, I'll go faster.
So I support many of the things you have said about reclaiming our energy future, making sure that Minnesota is a leader in green energy and innovation. You supported the Keystone XL pipeline. And rail safety, of course, is a huge concern, regardless of whether we're transporting Bakken oil or tar sands oil from Canada. Unfortunately, many of the claims that TransCanada has made and many of the aspects of the narrative in support of the Keystone XL pipeline have been duplicitous at best in terms of both our energy independence and the amount of jobs it would create, as well as the safety of that transportation method, because the bit unit of tar sands is so heavily viscous. Do you still stand by your support for Keystone?
Well, for the vote, yes. And the reason was that I was voting to affirm what the State Department, the Obama State Department put in, that they had met that. It never said anything about the actual final permits. It talked that the EIS was there and should the project be allowed to go to those next steps and move forward. It didn't talk about the economic impact of it. It didn't talk at a time whether it was still going to be needed. And those are some of the questions that are coming up right now. They're questioning whether we need to do it. Those are decisions that will be made, but I based it on the science. I told people, and I voted against it twice before it came up because they tried to derail the EIS. So they brought the EIS up. They did it right before 2 election cycles. Every campaign, this last campaign, they ran campaigns on, you would not guess this, Tim Walz voted against the Keystone XL pipeline. That's the ads they run. Yes, I did. I voted against it when it derailed the EIS. When the EIS came in from the State Department and the Obama State Department and said it meets the standards, I said yes, because again, if we're going to move the oil, now the debate about whether we should be in tar sands or not, fair one, should have been there. That wasn't what the vote was in front of me. Now you could make the argument, actually you could extrapolate that vote back to that, but I would say that, but I am always willing to look at the new science. I am always willing to look at where we should be, and I'm always willing when I need to say I'm wrong, to say the NRA has moved to a position that is unsustainable, it does not reflect who we are or who I am, and I understand by taking their money. And it's not good enough for me to say I took that money and used it to beat Republicans. I understand what the implications are of what that means, and I understand the frustrations of that. And again, and I would hope on any of these things, trying to see a movement along is where we should expect our officials, our elected officials to be. But I think on the merit of what the safety was, I would still do that, but again, that was not a vote to build it. It was a vote to say that the EIS was done and that the State Department did what they were supposed to do. So, I'll come back over here to join this.
Just a quick question, I'm sure you know what I'm going to ask. You mentioned looking to the east and seeing Wisconsin, looking to the south, seeing Iowa. The Janice case up in the Supreme Court and the Friedrichs case before that. We are looking under this administration at a national right to work. You know how labor heavy Minnesota is. We've got our rangers, we've got our teachers, our nurses. We are labor. what are your thoughts or ideas around protecting Minnesota from becoming
Yeah.
right to work, as we are now an island surrounded by right to
I
work?
totally agree with your analysis. I don't think we're as monolithic as labor, because if you've been up on the range, we know how a lot of those folks vote.
Right.
And I have been in places where people started to question that. It's going to be our job, and this is what I would say, as I'm a labor person, I come from a labor household, I am labor. I believe it improves people's lives. I believe in my profession, it makes us better teachers with better outcomes. I think there's a dignity that comes with work that the labor union was there for, and I think there's a whole lot of people benefiting in today's world, kind of the conversation we had about the woman on the platform, that they don't know where that came from. So I will fight to make sure that's there, but I will also take it a step further to start doing that education piece for those 93% of Minnesotans who are benefiting from what the labor movement does, but doesn't know where that was at, doesn't understand. Labor, we used to be the make it in America people. We used to be the people that were doing the work and being proud of. Now all of a sudden, when they talk about this, oh, the teachers union, whatever. That's my son's 4th grade teacher. That's who that is. Start to humanize it. So my job will be to make the case and for us to add value added in labor to protect those things. But your collectively right to bargain is fundamental to the democracy. There are very few things that are democratic with a small d than the right to make sure that you and your fellow citizens join together to create safe working conditions. We need to make sure, and I saw this with our unions who do it, make sure that we are so valuable and we are making the case that it becomes impossible to push against those. But if a bill comes forward from a Republican legislature, I think I can help us win outstate seats to make a run at the State House. But we know we're going to have a Senate here in Minnesota. If they bring a bill to my desk that's right to work, I will veto it every single case, because it is counter to what the middle class needs. It is counter to what we can do collectively to make and strengthen work. We should be able to sell this to anybody in the world. If you're working hard and playing by the rules, you should be able to have some basic things like healthcare. You should be able to retire with dignity, to have a pension that is protected and not gone when you get there. You should be able to improve your workplace working conditions so that you're not worried about being injured there, all of those things. And here's what I believe. The vast majority of employers want that too. We need to make the case. So, yes?
Okay, so I have, my son is in a level 3 classroom setting.
Yes.
He also happens to be a child of coke, and he started receiving services before the age of 3. So the preschool to prison pipeline is a very real thing that sadly my son could potentially be on. What would you do to address that, and then also to address the racial disparity in our criminal justice system overall?
Yeah. Well, let me go backwards on this one. In the criminal justice system. My wife is an educator with the Mankato Public Schools. She also worked for the Barred Prison Initiative that works at Taconic Women's Prison. And this issue of racial disparity is looking at how do we reintegrate and how do we focus on this. She very much sees this. She's come from an education. She's a lifelong teacher and administrator. But she's always talked to me, she said, we should think about budgets where the prison and the corrections budget is in the education budget, because these are one and the same. And the research that we know, especially early on, is that intervention you're talking about has to be there. It has to be the wraparound services to make sure it's there. We have to have this open and honest conversation about why is this happening. And as I said earlier, it's going to have to be with the people who are most affected by this at the table. And I think there's an attempt to do this at times, but I oftentimes think that it's after the fact, it's not beforehand. And this is one of those, as I said again, and someone told me not to say this. I said I would consider the opportunity gap and what's happening with the incarceration rates, if under my term as governor, if we did not lower and start to fix those, I would consider it a failure. And someone pointed out, they said the smartest and most dedicated people in the state of Minnesota are already working on this issue, and it isn't happening. And while that gives me pause, it simply tells me, in the way I've always done things, is it may not be that we have the best and the brightest people, but are we approaching it from the wrong angle? And I think that's where you bring in the folks who know what. That's why this Barred Prison Initiative. If you haven't heard this one, this program she worked with, she was a debate coach at West High School. This is the group that took the prisoners from Taconic Women's Prison and they beat Harvard in the debate. and maybe West Point in a debate. Maybe not Navy, but I'm an Army guy, so. But that's where I would say that this one, that we still, the commitment is here. I don't think it's Minnesota avoiding that this is an issue. What you said is real, that opportunity gap is real. It morphs itself into an incarceration rate that is disproportional and is simply hurting all of us. But again, until everyone sees that incarceration rate as their issue, or sees that opportunity gap, because if you're talking about an opportunity gap of children for color, in the district that I represent in the first district, that's 93.1% of the people aren't people who have children of color. So if they believe it's someone else's issue, that's how we fall into this trap. It's the other, it's a division, it's a whatever. These are our children as our state. If you don't want to look at it that way, they're your future employees. And if you're going to be trying to figure out how to get them, because we are going to have an employee shortage up here. It is going to happen. It's just a lot of basic demographics, aging population, and let's be honest with it, it's a lot because it gets cold, that there is a piece that comes into that. So I would tell you, as bringing the right people to the table, acknowledging that this is there, start looking at new ways of approaching this, start understanding, as you said, that these are all intertwined. It is terrifying to me, and I know this as a teacher, that by age 7, we can predict with 90% accuracy the graduation rates of those kids. That is just terrifying. That is not about a future that is open to limitless possibilities. That is one that is already on that track that you're talking about, and terrifying as a parent to say, you know, once they cross into that track, getting them untracked is very, very difficult.
It's almost impossible.
Almost impossible.
It just turns out.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, we need to say thank you.
Sorry. Thank you all. Give me a look. I'll work hard for you. We can be Minnesota, can be one Minnesota. We can do this joyfully and hopefully, even though I know that these are trying times. If we don't do it, no one else is going to do it. So thanks for being here
And
tonight.
I want to thank you for being here with us tonight. I know you have a really busy schedule, you made time for us, so thank you so
Glad to
much.
be here.
And for representing us and all your service that you're doing for us on the national.
Thank you all. Thank you.